Well, hello everyone, this is CJ with Cycletron. Well, today I'm going to tell you what I think Harley Davidson needs to do right now, and certainly in the next few weeks and few months. There's not really a lot of time for them to jump on these drastic measures that I think are needed to ensure the long-term survival of the company. So I know some of these may seem pretty wild or controversial. That's not my intention here. It just seems sort of like a logical progression of decisions that would likely need to be made given the current climate of global supply chain issues that continue to get worse in many respects. Variety of vehicle manufacturers, not just motorcycle manufacturers, but major automobile manufacturers have had to drastically cut production due to ongoing supply chain issues. So let's start with number one. Harley Davidson needs to cut down the number of dealerships in the United States from about 600 to 450. Now, at the beginning of the pandemic, they had around 700 dealerships, and in the next year, during 2020 and 2021, they closed 100 of those. So the unfortunate side effect of those closures were that the mom and pops, for most part, many of those were gone, and you had mostly the mega type dealerships that owned half dozen or even more dealerships across the country. Those dealerships were getting the lion's share of allocations. A lot of them resort to what I call typical shady business practices, not disclosing the price, trying to bury you in confusing financial arrangements, not disclosing the full cost of purchase, things like that. But the real issue is I'm not mad at the dealerships per se. It's just a practical matter. Harley Davidson is struggling to produce motorcycles. They had a production halt for about 19 days from May to June of 2022. Turns out it was related to a problem with supply of brake hoses to somebody else making brake systems. So presumably it was somebody making hoses possibly in China to probably Brembo in Italy. And as a result, Harley Davidson in the United States halted production. So that put them about 10 to 12,000 motorcycles behind the curve for the year. They say they're going to try and make it up, but I think I'd be pretty skeptical about that. In the last quarterly earnings call on July 28th, 2022, Harley Davidson announced a big drop in motorcycle production for the first half of this year as compared to the first half of last year. And the production decline was particularly hard here in the United States. So let's go back to how it could help closing 150 dealerships. Harley isn't producing enough bikes right now to have adequate inventory at the existing dealerships. And the ones that are getting them are typically the mega dealerships. So it would just be more logical, I think, that if you can't keep up with production and production isn't meeting demand, you would logically want to reduce the number of dealerships so that the dealers do have a full inventory or near a full inventory with which to work with. And that brings me to my next big item. I think Harley Davidson Motor Company needs to ensure that their dealers do not sell motorcycles above MSRP. This is creating a huge consumer backlash in the United States in particular with a variety of vehicle manufacturers, not just Harley Davidson. So much so that the Federal Trade Commission has proposed a series of rules governing dealer sales conduct. It's going to be harder for dealers if these proposed rules are implemented, which I think many of them will be, to not disclose the full cost of the motorcycle, to not be able to require add-ons that add no value to the motorcycle or are not disclosed as part of the full purchase price. Another big proposed rule is that dealers won't be able to discriminate between cash buyers and buyers who have to finance their purchase. What's going on right now is that because of the limited supply of motorcycles and reduced inventory, a dealer and frankly the manufacturers would much rather sell to a consumer who's not only going to pay full price and more for the vehicle, but they're also going to finance the purchase through either the manufacturer or some arrangement that the dealer has made. So they're going to make more money financing than if they sold to a cash buyer. Well, if those proposed rules from the FTC come into play, that's not going to be an option going forward. So going back to my first item where Harley, I think, needs to close about 150 dealerships, that should not come from the small ownership ranks, the mom and pops. That should come from the mega dealership ranks, in my opinion. The people that own a dozen or more stores, or 5, 6, 7, 8 stores. I think that's easy pickings, relatively speaking. Now you might say, well, having 600 dealerships across the United States is one of Harley's strengths. Well, how much of a strength is it when you go into a local dealer and they just don't have any bikes, or their selection's low, or they have such limited inventory that they're charging 25% above MSRP? The third thing I think Harley Davidson needs to do is they need to repatriate their supply chain. Now, Harley keeps it very close to the vest, the fact that a number of their parts on a given motorcycle assembled here in the United States is foreign sourced. Whether it's electronics from China and Mexico, engine components from Europe. There's a lot of foreign parts content today in a motorcycle that's assembled in York, Pennsylvania, probably 30 to 40%. I did a couple of videos about my 2020 Roadster. It was wrecked. I bought it as a salvage bike early in 2021. I ordered all the replacement parts from my local Harley dealer, OEM parts, and it took, in some cases, 7 or 8 months for all the parts to come in. And if they had told me that to begin with, I would have gone to the aftermarket to get my parts. One of the parts was a clutch cable on a 2020 Roadster, just a regular cable. It took 7 months for that thing to come in. So again, going back to the cut-in dealerships, if you can't buy a new bike, or you can't get your bike serviced because they can't get you a tire in any reasonable amount of time, or you've got to wait 7 months to get a clutch cable, something's got to give. You don't need that many dealerships if you can't get parts and you can't get bikes. The fourth thing I think Harley needs to do right now is to introduce a modern liquid-cooled touring motorcycle. Indian has the Challenger. They've had that since 2019. They introduced the Pursuit here in 2022. Where's Harley's liquid-cooled touring motorcycle with a modern high-tech frame? I think it needs to come, but it's not out there. And finally, this is going to tie some of the other things together, but Harley Davidson, in my opinion, needs to cut the number of motorcycles offered for sale. The 2022 model lineup has 31 bikes. Well, you might say, well, that's not that many, but Harley this year has gone back to making ABS an option on their touring motorcycles. And it's not a cost consideration, it's because they simply can't get the parts to install ABS on every motorcycle that they sell. So they're hoping many bike buyers will opt out of that, and that's fewer parts that they have to source. So cutting the number of models offered in a given year just seems logical. Now, a lot of these changes are big, they're drastic. They don't have to be forever, but the status quo of having 600 dealerships with very little inventory, with many of these dealerships selling well above MSRP, many of these dealerships either can or won't go to much effort to get you your replacement tire or clutch cable or what have you to get your bike back on the road. In fact, I think the supply chain issue is so problematic that Harley Davidson and their dealerships could be running afoul of warranty law. For example, if you don't have use of your new vehicle for something that should be repaired under warranty because they can't get the parts. You know, most states have laws that are in addition to the federal laws that limit the amount of time that you don't have use of your vehicle because either they can't fix it or they won't fix it. I haven't heard much talk about that relative to motorcycles, but I do see comments from people saying, you know, they bought a relatively new motorcycle, you know, within the last 1 or 2 years of manufacture, and it's been down for 4 months because they can't get a tire, a wheel, some other relatively straightforward part, you would think. We're not talking about chips. They're waiting to be shipped out. Well, please let me know what you think in the comments section. I know these are big points here. I'm suggesting it only in the spirit of things that need to be done to ensure Harley's long-term survival. Harley isn't the only company that produces vehicles having these struggles right now. However, unlike these other manufacturers like Honda, who's going to cut production in Japan by 40%, or Toyota, whose sales are down by 23% because they can't produce enough vehicles due to supply chain issues, Harley says, oh, well, we'll make up the lost production that we had from our shutdown, and don't worry, everything will be fine. I think that's drastically overly optimistic, and I think Harley needs to get real, and they need to get serious about making these structural changes to ensure the survival of the company. But these are my thoughts. I'd appreciate it if you let me know your thoughts in the comments section, and please stay tuned for future videos.